In the heart of West Lothian, Scotland, there's a quiet village where life moves at a slower pace. The River Avon winds gently through farmland and low gray hills, passing fields that have looked much the same for generations. This village is called Blackburn. It is not a place known for grand headlines or world-changing events. Instead, it is a place defined by routine and familiarity. Neighbors greet each other by name, families remain in the same homes for decades, and the rhythm of daily life rarely changes. For most people who grow up there, the future is simple and predictable: a steady job, a small home, and a life lived quietly among people who have known you since childhood. It was in this village, on the 1st of April, 1961, that Susan Magdalene Boyle was born. She arrived as the youngest of 9 children in a hard-working Scottish family. Her father, Patrick Boyle, was a miner who later worked as a World War II veteran and occasionally performed as a singer in local clubs. He had a deep voice and a love for music that he shared with his children. Her mother, Bridget Boyle, worked as a shorthand typist, but carried within her an unfulfilled dream. As a young woman, Bridget had once hoped to pursue singing professionally. Life, however, had taken her in a different direction. Marriage, family, and responsibility had replaced that dream, but the love for music never disappeared. The Boyle home was modest and often crowded, but it was never empty of warmth or sound. Conversations, laughter, and music filled the rooms. Bridget played the piano by ear, recreating melodies she had heard on the radio or at church. For young Susan, those moments became some of the most important memories of her childhood. She would sit quietly beside her mother, listening carefully as music filled the small living room. At first, she simply listened. Then she began to sing along. Slowly, without formal lessons or training, she started to discover the power of her own voice. Susan's early years, however, were not without difficulty. During her birth, complications caused a temporary lack of oxygen to her brain. Doctors warned that the incident might affect her development. As she grew older, she was labeled as having a learning difficulty. At the time, understanding of such conditions was limited, and labels were often applied quickly and without much explanation. For Susan, the label followed her everywhere. Teachers treated her differently, classmates noticed the difference, and gradually she began to believe that perhaps she was less capable than others. School became a challenging environment. Susan was shy and often unsure how to interact socially. Her mannerisms and interests sometimes set her apart from other children. In classrooms and playgrounds, those differences made her an easy target for teasing. The cruelty was not always dramatic, but it was persistent. The quiet exclusion, the jokes, the whispers that reminded her again and again that she was not quite the same as everyone else. Over time, those experiences shaped the way she saw herself. Confidence was difficult to build when so many voices around her seemed to question her place in the world. Yet, even in those difficult years, there was something that gave Susan a sense of peace. Music remained constant. Inside the Boyle home, songs drifted through the hallways almost every day. Bridget continued to encourage her daughter, often asking her to sing along while she played the piano. Susan listened carefully, memorizing melodies and harmonies without realizing she was training her ear. By the age of 12, it was clear that she possessed something extraordinary. When she sang, her voice carried warmth, depth, and emotion far beyond her years. It was the kind of voice that made people stop mid-conversation and turn their heads in surprise. But talent alone does not always create confidence. Susan still struggled to believe in herself. The same shy girl who felt uncertain in conversations was suddenly capable of filling a room with powerful sound when she sang. It was as if the music allowed her to become someone else, someone stronger, more certain, more at ease with the world around her. One place where Susan truly felt that transformation was Our Lady of Lourdes Church in Blackburn. The church became an important part of her life, not only as a place of faith, but also as a place where music had meaning. When she joined the choir, she discovered something she had rarely experienced before: acceptance. Inside the church, people listened to her voice rather than judging her personality. When Susan sang during services, the notes echoed through the building with remarkable clarity. Parishioners began to recognize the beauty of her voice, even if Susan herself remained unsure of its true potential. Father Charles Hendry, who served as the parish priest, would later remember those early years clearly. According to him, Susan possessed the kind of voice that appears only rarely, a voice filled with natural emotion and sincerity. Her mother recognized this gift immediately and believed firmly that her daughter had the ability to do something remarkable with it. But belief from others is not always enough to overcome self-doubt. For Susan, confidence came slowly. After leaving school, Susan enrolled at West Lothian College, where she studied with the hope of eventually working in catering. The path seemed practical and realistic, a sensible direction for someone who had spent most of her life being told to keep her expectations modest. Yet music remained present in her life. Whenever she could afford it, she took singing lessons to improve her technique. She also entered small local talent competitions, performing at community gatherings and charity events. Those performances were modest, often taking place in small halls or community centers, but they allowed Susan to keep her dream alive. She imagined a future where she might sing professionally, perhaps on stage or even on television. In the early 1990s, she attempted to take a larger step toward that dream by applying to appear on a television talent show. It was an opportunity that might have allowed her voice to reach a much wider audience. She applied once, then she applied again. Both times, she was rejected. For many people, those rejections might have ended the dream entirely. For Susan, they became quiet disappointments that she carried without much complaint. Life continued moving forward, and responsibilities began to take priority over ambition. In 1997, tragedy struck the family when Susan's father passed away. The loss was deeply felt. Patrick Boyle had been a steady presence in the household, and his absence left a space that was difficult to fill. In the years that followed, Susan's mother, Bridget, began to grow increasingly frail. The woman who had encouraged Susan's singing for so long now needed care herself. Without hesitation, Susan stepped into the role of primary caregiver. For years, she remained by her mother's side, helping with daily routines and ensuring that Bridget was never alone. During this time, Susan's own ambitions faded quietly into the background. Singing lessons became less frequent, and opportunities to perform grew rare. Most days were spent inside the family home on Ewlands Avenue, where life revolved around caring for her mother. To the outside world, Susan Boyle appeared to be living a small and ordinary life. She was a middle-aged woman in a quiet Scottish village who rarely traveled far from home. People saw her walking through the neighborhood, visiting the local shops, or attending church services. There was little in her routine that suggested she might one day become famous. Her world consisted of simple things: the house she shared with her mother, the daily routines of caregiving, and the quiet companionship of a black-and-white cat named Pebbles. For years, this small circle formed the boundaries of her life. And yet, beneath that quiet existence, something remarkable remained. The voice that had once filled the church with music was still there. The dream that had once inspired her to apply for television auditions had not completely disappeared. It had simply been waiting through years of doubt, waiting through responsibility and loss, waiting through a life that seemed ordinary to everyone who observed it. What no one realized at the time was that Susan Boyle was standing on the edge of a moment that would change everything, not only for her, but for millions of people around the world who had never heard her name. For decades, she had lived quietly in Blackburn, almost invisible to the outside world. But soon, the world would finally hear her voice. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. For most of her life, Susan Boyle had lived quietly in Blackburn, caring for her mother and keeping her dream of singing alive in small, private ways. The world beyond her village did not know her name, and there was little reason to believe that it ever would. But before Bridget Boyle passed away in 2007, she gave her daughter one final piece of advice, a promise that Susan would carry with her long after the house on Ewlands Avenue had grown silent. Bridget told her daughter not to give up on her voice. She insisted that Susan should try again to show the world what she could do. It was not said with pressure or expectation, but with the quiet certainty of a mother who believed deeply in her child. Susan promised she would try. 2 years later, that promise would lead her to a stage that would change her life forever. On April 11, 2009, a 47-year-old woman from Blackburn arrived at the Glasgow Clyde Auditorium, where auditions were being held for a popular television competition. The show was Britain's Got Talent, a program designed to discover unexpected performers from across the United Kingdom. Thousands of hopeful contestants had already stood on that stage, hoping for a moment of recognition. Most were quickly forgotten. Few left any lasting impression. When Susan Boyle stepped onto the stage that afternoon, she did not look like a typical television star. She wore a simple gold dress that did not quite fit perfectly. Her hair was unstyled, her posture slightly nervous, and her manner shy but determined. The audience of several thousand people watched with curiosity, unsure what to expect. The judges, including the famously skeptical Simon Cowell, sat behind their desk with the familiar expressions of professionals who had already seen hundreds of auditions that day. At first, the atmosphere was light and slightly dismissive. When Susan introduced herself and revealed that she was 47 years old and hoping to become a professional singer, parts of the audience reacted with laughter. It was not always cruel laughter, but it carried the unmistakable sound of disbelief. Television talent shows often thrive on moments like this: the awkward audition, the contestant who dreams big but lacks the ability to match that dream. Many in the room seemed to assume they were about to witness exactly that. Simon Cowell asked her a simple question: "What's the dream?" Susan answered with quiet honesty. She explained that she wanted to be a professional singer and hoped to succeed like the legendary musical theater star Elaine Paige. The response drew more skeptical smiles. The audience shifted in their seats, waiting for the performance to begin. Then the music started. Susan had chosen a song from the famous musical Les Miserables, a song known for its emotional depth and technical difficulty. The opening notes filled the auditorium, and for a brief moment the room remained restless, uncertain. Then Susan Boyle began to sing. The first line, "I dreamed a dream in time gone by," rose into the air with remarkable clarity. The effect was immediate and electric. Within seconds, the atmosphere in the room changed completely. The laughter disappeared. Conversation stopped. People leaned forward in their seats, suddenly aware that they were witnessing something unexpected. Susan's voice was powerful, rich with emotion, and filled with a sincerity that could not be faked. Each note carried the weight of years of quiet practice, years of waiting, years of believing in a dream that had never quite found its moment. The audience, which had begun the audition with skepticism, now erupted into cheers and applause. The judges were visibly stunned. Amanda Holden covered her mouth in disbelief. Piers Morgan leaned forward, nodding slowly as if confirming what he was hearing. Simon Cowell, who was known for his brutally honest reactions, raised his eyebrows and watched with growing admiration. By the time Susan reached the chorus, the entire auditorium was captivated. Something extraordinary was happening, not just a good performance, but a moment of genuine transformation. The audience that had laughed moments earlier was now rising to its feet, cheering for a woman they had underestimated only minutes before. When the song ended, the response was overwhelming. Thousands of people stood and applauded. The judges praised her performance with genuine enthusiasm. Simon Cowell would later describe it as one of the biggest surprises he had ever experienced on the show. But the real impact of that moment had not yet begun. That evening, the audition was uploaded online. Within hours, the clip began spreading across the internet at an astonishing pace. People shared it with friends, family members, and colleagues. Viewers watched the performance not only for the singing, but for the transformation they witnessed, the moment when assumptions dissolved and admiration took their place. Within 24 hours, millions of people had watched the video. Within a week, the number had climbed into the tens of millions. Before long, the audition had become one of the most watched viral videos in internet history. Audiences around the world were captivated by the story of a quiet woman from a small Scottish village who had stepped onto a stage and revealed a voice powerful enough to silence an entire auditorium. News organizations began covering the story. Newspapers printed her photograph on their front pages. Television programs replayed the audition repeatedly, discussing the emotional reaction it had inspired. Journalists traveled to Blackburn, searching for the house on Ewlands Avenue where Susan Boyle had lived quietly for decades. For the people who already knew her, the sudden attention felt surreal. Neighbors spoke to reporters about the woman they had seen walking to the local shops or singing at church services. They explained that Susan had always been kind, friendly, and passionate about music. Her voice had never been a secret to those who lived nearby. What surprised them was not her talent, but the speed with which the rest of the world had discovered it. Almost overnight, Susan Boyle became an international phenomenon. But even as cameras arrived in Blackburn and reporters gathered outside her home, Susan herself remained remarkably grounded. The fame was sudden and overwhelming, yet she continued to speak with the same quiet sincerity that had defined her life before the audition. For decades, the world had not noticed her. Now, suddenly, the entire world was listening. And Susan Boyle's journey had only just begun. The days following Susan Boyle's audition quickly became a whirlwind unlike anything she had ever experienced before. For most of her life, she had lived quietly in Blackburn, where the rhythm of daily life rarely changed. Now, almost overnight, that quiet routine had been replaced by international attention. The video of her audition on Britain's Got Talent continued spreading rapidly across the internet, watched by millions of people who were captivated not only by her voice, but by the story behind it. In a world filled with carefully crafted celebrity images, Susan Boyle appeared refreshingly genuine. She was not polished, not glamorous in the conventional sense, and not someone who had spent years building a public persona. She was simply herself, a woman who loved music and who had finally been given the chance to sing. The speed with which the story spread surprised even the producers of the show. Within days, Susan Boyle had become a global topic of conversation. Television programs replayed her audition repeatedly. Newspapers across Europe and North America printed headlines celebrating the unexpected discovery of a powerful voice hidden in a small Scottish village. Online platforms filled with comments from viewers who described being moved to tears by the moment she began to sing. For many people, the performance represented something rare, a reminder that extraordinary talent can appear in the most ordinary places. As the next rounds of the competition approached, anticipation continued to grow. Viewers who had seen the audition were eager to know whether Susan Boyle could live up to the expectations that now surrounded her. It is one thing to surprise an audience once. It is another to maintain that impact under the intense pressure of global attention. For Susan, the challenge was enormous. She had gone from relative anonymity to worldwide recognition in a matter of days. Cameras followed her everywhere. Journalists asked endless questions, and millions of viewers waited to see what she would do next. When she returned to the stage for the semifinals, the atmosphere was very different from the first audition. This time, the audience knew exactly who she was. Instead of skepticism, there was excitement. Instead of laughter, there was anticipation. People leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear the voice that had surprised the world. Susan chose another powerful musical theater song, Memory, from the famous musical Cats. The song demanded both emotional depth and technical control, qualities that had already begun to define her performances. As the music started and she began to sing, the audience once again fell silent. Her voice carried the same sincerity that had captured attention during the audition, but now it was accompanied by something new: confidence. Susan Boyle was no longer simply the unexpected contestant from Blackburn. She had become a performer capable of commanding the attention of thousands. The judges responded with admiration. Simon Cowell, known for his often blunt critiques, praised her ability to connect emotionally with the audience. The performance confirmed that her first audition had not been a lucky moment. Susan Boyle was genuinely talented, and her place in the competition had been earned. Yet the experience was not without difficulty. The sudden fame placed enormous pressure on Susan. Tabloid newspapers examined every aspect of her life, from her appearance to her personal habits. Photographers waited outside her home, hoping to capture images of the woman who had become an international sensation. For someone who had spent most of her life in privacy, the attention was overwhelming. Despite these challenges, Susan continued moving forward in the competition. Each performance attracted more viewers and strengthened the connection between her and the audience. People around the world began to see her not just as a talented singer, but as a symbol of perseverance, someone who had spent decades pursuing a dream that many had dismissed as unrealistic. Finally, the night of the Britain's Got Talent final arrived. Millions of viewers tuned in to watch the conclusion of the season. The atmosphere in the theater was electric, filled with excitement and tension. Susan Boyle returned to the stage once again and performed the song that had introduced her to the world, "I Dreamed a Dream." The choice was meaningful. The lyrics spoke of hope, disappointment, and the enduring power of dreams, themes that now seemed closely connected to her own life story. Her performance was powerful and emotional, and the audience responded with another standing ovation. When the voting results were announced later that evening, however, Susan finished in second place. The winners of the competition were the dance group Diversity, whose energetic performance had captured the public vote. For some contestants, finishing second might have been a disappointment, but in Susan Boyle's case, the outcome hardly mattered. By the time the final ended, she had already achieved something far greater than a television trophy. She had captured the attention of the entire world. Millions of people had heard her voice, and the response had been overwhelming. Record companies quickly recognized the opportunity. Within months, Susan Boyle signed a recording contract and began working on her debut album. The album, titled "I Dreamed a Dream," was released later that year and immediately broke records. It became the fastest-selling debut album in the United Kingdom and quickly reached #1 on music charts in multiple countries, including the United States, Canada, Australia, and Ireland. For the woman who had once believed her moment might never come, the transformation was astonishing. At 48 years old, Susan Boyle had become a global recording artist. Her story resonated with people across cultures and generations. Some saw in her journey the triumph of hidden talent finally recognized. Others saw the power of perseverance, proof that success does not always arrive early in life. Many simply admired the sincerity of a singer who had never tried to change who she was in order to fit expectations. The quiet woman from Blackburn had stepped onto a stage and revealed a voice the world could not ignore. And as the applause continued long after the competition ended, it became clear that Susan Boyle's story was far from finished. In fact, it was only just beginning. After finishing second in Britain's Got Talent, Susan Boyle's life changed almost overnight. The quiet streets of Blackburn could no longer contain her story. Cameras, journalists, and fans followed her every step. But Susan remained remarkably grounded, holding on to the routines and values that had shaped her life long before the world noticed. By November 2009, her debut album, I Dreamed a Dream, had been released, and the response was nothing short of extraordinary. It became the fastest-selling debut album in the United Kingdom and quickly reached #1 on music charts in multiple countries, including the United States, Canada, Australia, and Ireland. For the woman who had once believed her moment might never come, the transformation was astonishing. At 48 years old, Susan Boyle had become a global recording artist. Her story resonated with people across cultures and generations. Some saw in her journey the triumph of hidden talent finally recognized. Others saw the power of perseverance, proof that success does not always arrive early in life. Many simply admired the sincerity of a singer who had never tried to change who she was in order to fit expectations. The quiet woman from Blackburn had stepped onto a stage and revealed a voice the world could not ignore. And as the applause continued long after the competition ended, it became clear that Susan Boyle's story was far from finished. In fact, it was only just beginning.
Prestigious venues and events. She performed for the President of the United States at the White House, sang before members of the British royal family at the Royal Variety Performance, and toured extensively across North America, Japan, South Korea, and Australia. Each performance required meticulous preparation, long flights, and constant media engagement. But Susan remained focused on her music rather than the celebrity. She continued to live in Blackburn, retaining the familiar routines and the sense of belonging that grounded her. Despite her global recognition, she returned to her small home on Ewlands Avenue, where her cat, Pebbles, awaited her. The contrast between international stages and her quiet Scottish life highlighted her resilience and humility. Fame had arrived, but she did not allow it to define her identity. Yet the immense success and exposure were not without cost. The intensity of global attention, media scrutiny, and relentless public expectation took a toll on her mental and emotional health. For someone who had never sought fame and who had built her life around simplicity and stability, the transition was overwhelming. Interviews, magazine features, and unsolicited commentary often examined her appearance, age, and mannerisms as much as her musical talent. Tabloid scrutiny was constant, and paparazzi often intruded on her privacy. Despite this, Susan maintained a remarkable composure, demonstrating a quiet strength rooted in decades of perseverance. Friends and family noted that she approached the demands of her career with the same diligence she had shown in private life, whether caring for her mother or practicing her voice in solitude. Susan Boyle's resilience, however, was not simply a matter of endurance. It was active, daily, and conscious, a consistent commitment to continue despite the challenges, setbacks, and pressures of fame. Over the next few years, she continued releasing albums: Beyond Dreams, Someone to Watch Over Me, Standing Ovation, Hope, A Wonderful World, and 10, each project reinforcing her reputation as an artist of integrity and depth. Her music connected deeply with audiences, who were drawn not only to her extraordinary vocal talent, but also to the authenticity she brought to every performance. For her fans, Susan Boyle was more than a singer. She was a symbol of possibility, a living testament that late bloomers, quiet dreamers, and those overlooked by society could rise and leave an indelible mark on the world. In 2012, Susan Boyle made a personal disclosure that reshaped public understanding of her life. She revealed that she had been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, a form of autism. The diagnosis brought relief and clarity, helping her explain the social difficulties and challenges she had navigated throughout her life. For many in the neurodiverse community, Susan's openness became a source of inspiration and visibility. It underscored the fact that talent, brilliance, and extraordinary achievement could coexist with difference, and that understanding one's own mind could be a transformative experience. The public, already captivated by her story of perseverance and late-blooming success, now witnessed another layer of her resilience, a quiet, profound courage that went beyond music into the very way she experienced and understood the world. However, alongside triumph came vulnerability. The demands of fame tested her physically, emotionally, and mentally. She was candid about anxiety, loneliness, and the difficulties of managing a public life that was thrust upon her, yet she never allowed these challenges to overshadow her music. Susan Boyle's story during these years was not only about international acclaim or record-breaking albums, it was also about navigating the weight of extraordinary expectations while remaining fundamentally herself. She continued to sing, to record, to tour, and to perform with a sincerity that audiences recognized as rare in a world dominated by spectacle and manufactured celebrity. Through it all, Blackburn remained her home, her anchor, and her place of reflection, providing a stable center amidst a life that had suddenly expanded to encompass the world. In April 2022, Susan Boyle, at 60 years old, faced an unexpected and life-altering crisis. She suffered a stroke. For someone whose identity, purpose, and joy had long been intertwined with her singing, the stroke represented more than a medical emergency. It threatened the very core of her existence. The damage affected her voice, her mobility, and her confidence, turning everyday activities into challenges that once seemed trivial. For weeks, she withdrew from the public eye, and fans noticed her absence with concern, unaware of the gravity of her situation. Privately, however, the struggle was relentless. Susan undertook a rigorous rehabilitation program, driven by an extraordinary commitment to reclaim her voice. She invested over £50,000 of her own money to work with specialists in vocal rehabilitation, speech therapy, and physiotherapy, dedicating up to 5 hours a day to exercises that were physically exhausting and emotionally draining. Each session involved rebuilding the coordination between breath and tone, retraining the muscles of the larynx, and restoring the neurological precision required for singing, while simultaneously addressing posture, balance, and the subtle ways her body had adapted to the stroke's limitations. The process was as much psychological as it was physical. Susan confronted grief, fear, and uncertainty daily, moments when tears came easily, but she refused to let despair take hold. She focused on incremental progress, celebrating the smallest victories, 30 seconds of sustained sound, a note that held its pitch, as proof that recovery was possible. Her therapists, astonished by her perseverance, described her dedication as unparalleled, noting that she never missed a session, never skipped an exercise, and trusted the process even when results seemed invisible. The rehabilitation demanded courage and discipline, but Susan Boyle approached it with the same quiet determination she had shown throughout her life, a life of long preparation, patience, and resilience.
Months passed, and gradually the voice began to re-emerge. It was not identical to the voice the world had first heard in 2009. It carried new textures, subtle fragility, and a depth that spoke of lived experience, struggle, and triumph. Yet it was unmistakably Susan Boyle, a voice that had been fought for, earned through pain and persistence, and reclaimed against impossible odds. Her story during this period was not only of medical recovery, but also a testament to the power of human determination and the profound connection between identity and art. Susan's journey through stroke and rehabilitation became a quiet legend in its own right, inspiring those who faced adversity, showing that even when the unthinkable happens, the work of rebuilding, restoring, and reclaiming what is lost can lead to a form of victory that is as meaningful as any applause on a stage. In the end, her return to singing was more than a comeback. It was the affirmation that a voice once nurtured and once silenced can rise again, carrying not just notes, but the story of resilience, patience, and unyielding courage.
Not as a contestant seeking validation, but as a testament to resilience, courage, and the enduring power of her voice. The world had followed her extraordinary journey, from viral sensation to global superstar, through albums, accolades, and the unforeseen trial of a stroke, and now they witnessed the continuation of that story, live, in real time. The studio was filled with anticipation, an audience of thousands waiting, cameras poised, and judges, including Simon Cowell, who had known her brilliance from the very beginning, watching with barely contained emotion. As Susan walked onto the stage, there was an instant recognition, not just of her physical presence, but of the immense personal journey she had undergone. The applause began before she sang a single note, a collective acknowledgement of the months of grueling rehabilitation, the £50,000 invested in private therapy, the 5-hour daily vocal exercises, and the sheer determination required to reclaim a voice that had been threatened by illness. Then, as the familiar first lines of "I Dreamed a Dream" filled the auditorium, the audience was enveloped in a sound both familiar and profoundly transformed, a voice that carried the weight of struggle, the richness of experience, and the unmistakable beauty of triumph. It was a voice that had faced silence, fear, and uncertainty, and had emerged stronger, nuanced, and deeply human. Viewers around the world watching the broadcast and online streams were moved not simply by technical perfection, but by the narrative of endurance embedded in every phrase and every note. Susan Boyle, in that moment, was more than a singer. She was a living embodiment of perseverance, a reminder that life's setbacks do not define the limits of what is possible. In interviews following the performance, she spoke openly about the stroke, the fear, and the painstaking journey of rehabilitation, emphasizing that while the experience had been harrowing, it had also reaffirmed her commitment to her art, her belief in the power of persistence, and the deep responsibility she felt toward those who had believed in her across decades of public and private struggle. The response was immediate and profound. Messages poured in from stroke survivors, musicians, fans, and ordinary people inspired by the story of a woman who refused to surrender to adversity. Social media erupted with admiration and emotion. Commentators spoke of awe and respect rather than mere entertainment, and in Blackburn, neighbors and friends watched with pride as Susan once again proved that talent, courage, and determination can transcend even the most formidable obstacles. The comeback was not simply a performance, it was a declaration that a voice once threatened by silence could return, stronger, richer, and more resonant, and that the story of Susan Boyle was far from over.